Let's shut this down. Oh, no, definitely save it. Save your data. We'll come back to that next time too. And that. And here is what I wanted to show you, Connor, and to discuss with you, because it actually ties into what Rory was saying before. So the question that Rory and Connor both asked, which was so good, and you guys can just sit back and just take this in if you want, because we're going to revisit this as the class goes on. What confidence do you pick? What confidence do you pick? 95, because Mom said I had to and I had to bring the car back by midnight. No. Why 95? It's not that easy of an answer. The first thing you have to do, can we go back to the deck of cards real quick for a moment? I think this is a good illustration. Either the deck of cards I was dealing to you guys was fair or it wasn't. And you don't know which of those two things is true with 100% certainty, do you? Because I never looked at the deck, because I'm a bastard. No, because that's your population, right? That's your population. So you know one of them is true, but you don't know which. Okay? Here are the two claims you're allowed to make. Here are the two claims that you're allowed to make. You can either tell me the deck isn't fair, you lion SOB, or you can say, you know what, the deck is fair, I think the deck's fine. Those are the two things you could say. So do you see how there are four possibles of what could happen after a research study? You could say the deck isn't fair when it actually is. You could say the deck isn't fair when it isn't. You could say the deck is fair when the deck is fair, or you could say the deck is fair when the deck is not fair. In how many of those did you make the correct conclusion?
2.
In 2 of them. When you said the deck isn't fair and it's not, that's correct. It's off and you nailed it correctly. Or you say the deck is fair when it is, that's also correct. You made the correct assignation of fairness. So in other words, this would be, to give you a non-card example, go back to my muscle therapy. My muscle therapy example, suppose you're trying to develop a new muscle therapy. Either the therapy is going to work or it's not. And your study that checks the efficacy is either going to say it works or it doesn't. If your study says it works and it actually does, boom, good. If your study says it doesn't work and it actually doesn't, boom, good. But there are 2 ways to be wrong, aren't there? There are 2 ways to be wrong. Let's go through them real quick. That's called a false positive. We learned about this in 243 in that last project. When you say something isn't quite right, but it actually is just fine, that's called a false positive. That means you identified, you flagged something as having changed, but it actually didn't. From the muscle therapy thing, you say, hey, this therapy works great. This therapy works great, but it actually doesn't work great. It actually, you just got goofy outlier data, or poor sampling. But more likely, you got one of those 5% outlier datas. That's where your 5% comes in. Connor, please.
You're saying that it doesn't work, and then it does work.
No, I'm saying you say it does work. No, this is saying you say isn't fair means the deck has changed from fair to unfair. The therapy you have to think about it kind of backwards. Saying the therapy works is like saying the deck isn't fair. That does correlate. You'll see why. Give me like 3 or 4 weeks. I want to answer this question. We're getting a little bit into areas we haven't talked about yet. But it means that you've escaped what is usual. You're trying to show your therapy is better than traditional therapy. Traditional therapy has, if you will, a confidence interval around it. You're trying to show that you've exceeded that interval. So you're out of the interval, you're changing the parameter. A little squirrely maybe?
I got it.
A squid squirrely, but we're getting there. Good, very, very good. You might want to avoid a false positive like the plague. You might never want to make a false positive. You might not want to publish your results. You might not want to publish your results unless you can almost alleviate completely the chance of a false positive. Which means, if this is now at 5%, because confidence is at 95%, you might want to bump confidence up to make the false positive probability go down. Fair? Fair, maybe close. That's one attack at confidence. Something we'll come back to is the chance of a false negative. And I'm doing this pretty quickly because we'll come back to it when we get back in hypothesis testing. A false negative implies that you say the deck is fair, or you say that my muscle therapy doesn't work any better than what's already out there. But what if the deck isn't fair? Or your therapy actually does work great, but you missed it. You missed it. The best way I can illustrate this right now. Remember this interval right here, this blue one? That was so wide, it captured the 50%, where the smaller ones didn't. The only reason it captured the 50% was because it was so wide. And the only reason it's so wide is most likely because the sample size was very small. Drove the width of the interval up. When you have those kinds of results, the tests are said to have very low power, which is kind of inversely tied to confidence. If you want to avoid a false negative, you actually want to decrease confidence below 95%. And this will all, I have an entire project devoted to this idea for you guys because we can't learn it in 10 minutes. But I did want to answer Connor's question about it. It's nowhere near as simple as, 95%. It's not as simple as the journals make it seem. You don't always want 95% confidence. It depends on which way you would more likely to be, which way you would prefer to be wrong. There's always a chance of being wrong. There's always a chance of being wrong in these tests because you could get goofy, deviant data. The question is, which one can you live with? I'm a rock climber. Give you a quick example, then I'll kick you out of here. I'm a rock climber. When I hooked my harness on Mount Washington, which I was just on about a month ago, rappelling off the summit of Mount Washington, and I leaned back in my harness, I don't want it to break. I don't want to fall 500 feet to my death and then roll into the crater below. I want to make sure that the testing that was done on that harness catches any possible problem in the structural stability of that harness. So I want that to be recalled. I want that harness to be recalled if they're even slightly in doubt of there. So what I want is, I don't want them saying, the harness is fine, when the harness is not fine. I don't want them selling me a harness. We did a couple tests, yeah, in between PBR runs, it was good. I don't want a false negative. That's what a false negative would be. The harness is fine. No, the harness is not fine. I don't want you to tell me that it is. So for a harness testing situation, I want to avoid, no pun intended, I want to avoid a false negative. I don't know, I had a pun in my head, now it's gone. I want to avoid this very, very badly. I want to avoid a false negative, which means I would lower confidence to avoid a false negative. So does that, it's a loaded question, it's a great question, and it deserves a project, because your textbook doesn't even mention it. But it's, how many of you have ever been in a psych class where they talk about a low-powered test, a test with low power? Have you heard that phrase before? A couple of you maybe, nods, yeah. Low power is directly tied to small samples usually. And a low power is tied to a very high false negative rate. Well, I didn't get into this in the 243 project. I just defined false negative and false positive with you guys. We didn't get into the power and the confidence because I figured that's 244. So it's a loaded question, Connor and Rory. It's a great question, and it's one that we're going to come back to over and over again, but I do have a whole project for you guys to do on it, so we'll get to that, I promise. Fantastic question, fantastic. Nowhere near easy to answer. You guys are great. We'll catch you on Thursday. We'll do some more of this. Maybe talk about the Guinness Brewery and how they invented the tea distribution I was talking about. Hi. Because I want to keep it with it.
And we're coming from the office. And so, I mean, we have like 45 minutes
Sure.
to get here, but I've been noticing even with 45 minutes
It's-
with traffic and
Dude, of course.
stuff and a little.
And realize too, that you got the videos. If you ever need to just be like, you know what, I'm staying home today. You got the videos. Are you taking other classes besides mine today?
I am.
Okay, and here at Bend? Okay, well, I mean, just realize, everything's videotaped. You can get to it.
Yeah.
If you decide to
Yeah,
pull
I
a day
just
where you're like, you know what, to hell with this.
I just wanted to let you know because I feel bad, like
Don't feel
strolling
bad.
in
Please
here
don't feel
15
bad.
minutes late.
Please don't feel bad, okay? Please don't. I mean, I understand how much life takes precedence over all this, and
Yeah,
that's why I'm so
that's what
glad to
happened
have
the
this.
first day was we showed up early
You
and
good?
nobody was there. And so I was like,
Yeah.
well,
Oh, this is great, dude. Please
Well,
don't
we're gonna be
worry.
late.
Please don't worry. This is why we have the resources.
or,
All is good. All is good.
thank you.
You are welcome. Thank you.